Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Kevin Moore Show. Now, if you want to stay up to date with all my latest videos, just click that subscribe button below, as it really helps to support the show. If you're new to the show, I interview guests from a spiritual perspective, covering mainstream and alternative subjects and much more. Now, on today's show, I'm about to be joined by my guest, David Griffin. Now, David joined the US Navy in 1962, and after being honorably discharged in 66, he returned to central New York. He is married and has 4 children, and Mr. Griffin began his career in investigations and law enforcement in 1975. In 1979, the Madison County, New York's Department of Social Services hired him as a senior child support investigator. In 1981, he joined the Madison County Sheriff's Department and attained the rank of sergeant. He retired in 1995 and since has written many books on true crime. He joins me today to discuss his book, The Rise and Fall of a Casino Mobster, the Tony Spilatro story. Dennis Griffin, welcome to the show.
My pleasure, Kevin. Great to be with you.
Wonderful to have you on. And I was just saying there before we were just recording that you've done some wonderful books, and gosh, I could be there all day just reading some of the books you've done. Do you want to just give a bit of a background on yourself as well, if possible?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Rome, New York. That's upstate between Utica and Syracuse. And I lived there all my life until I went in the service. I did 4 years back in the Navy back in 62 to 66. And when I got out of the service, I ended up getting into law enforcement as a deputy sheriff in Madison County, New York. And I also moonlighted as a village cop in 3 of the villages within Madison County. I eventually went with New York State as an investigator for the laboratory division of the state health department, investigating primarily healthcare fraud, Medicaid, Medicare fraud. And I retired in 1994, and I didn't know what to do with myself. I found out I couldn't play golf very well, so I needed another hobby. So I decided to start writing. I had a story I wanted to tell about an investigation I had done, and I didn't intend to write any more than that. I just wanted to get the story out. So I did. I wrote a book titled The Morgue, and it was about an investigation of a medical examiner's office. And I got to admit, I ended up getting the writing bug. So from there, I got, I think, 24 books out and a couple more in the hopper.
So let me get this right then, Dennis. You worked as an investigator in law enforcement in New York State, retiring in 94, and you mainly investigated white-collar crime. So for those who may not know what that is, what is white-collar crime?
Yeah, white-collar is primarily the nonviolent, generally professional people who make money in various ways that they shouldn't, such as fraud. Frauds are a big thing. Healthcare fraud, obviously, a big item.
I can imagine it is, absolutely. So, okay, you retired in 94 and you got the sort of writing bug then. I guess you didn't know you had it, but you sort of discovered that you could write, yeah?
Yeah, I all I had done before that in the way of writing is I had filled in the blanks on reports and so forth. I didn't do any creative writing. So I didn't know. When I did the morgue, I sent the manuscript out to an editor, and I was told that I needed some work and, but that I had potential. So I finished the morgue, and when I look at it today, every once in a while, I open it up and just look at it again. And I think, did I write that? Because I've learned so much since then. But that was my first effort, and it'll probably be one of my favorites always because it was a story about something I had done. So
let me get this right. So how many books have you authored so far?
I believe 24, the number 24 just came out, and I got a couple more in the hopper that are at the publishers.
Incredible. So your first authored books, I guess they were based on investigations that you had done in your career.
Correct.
And what were some of those investigations? Just so I mean, we'll put the links below in the description below for this video on some of those past books. But what were some of them?
One was, of course, the morgue I mentioned was the first one. That was a fictionalized account of an investigation I had done of a medical examiner's office, and it dealt with body stealing. Whenever I think of body stealing, I visualize Boris Karloff and Peter Lorre going into a graveyard at night, digging up a corpse for medical school. Excuse me. But that statute was still on the books for body stealing. And taking organs and so forth without permissions and that type of thing. Very bizarre case. From there, I got into something called red gold, and oil is generally called black gold. Red gold was what blood was very valuable to the fraud artists that were bilking Medicaid, and they had to have a blood supply and how they went about getting this blood. Another one was called blood money. It was a similar story about the healthcare fraud and about what happened. And then from there, I got into some mystery thriller type fiction. I did a 3-book, not a series, but 3 books about a male-female Las Vegas homicide detective team. Fictionalized, but based on real events. And then eventually I switched to nonfiction in 2001.
2001. Okay, so you moved from New York State to Nevada. Vegas was where you were based. Why Vegas for you? Why did you move there?
Well, my wife had a health condition that prevented us from staying in the New York climate, the wonderful winter New York climate. And her condition is extremely painful and can be aggravated by the cold. So we had to get out of New York, at least for the winters. And we weren't sure where to go. And we had been to Vegas a couple of times on, the week-long gambling trips and so on. And we really liked it. So we ended up in Vegas.
Okay. And it was obviously there that, life just takes us on a strange journey sometimes, doesn't it? And we sort of, we meet people who open us up with ideas, and it was through, I believe, some conference that you attended that you sort of gained access then to sort of the local Vegas police department, where you were sort of producing some sort of non-fiction book for them. I mean, tell us, I don't know too much about it. You'd have to fill in the blanks.
Yeah, I was at a writer's conference. I was writing mystery thriller fictions at that point, and I was kind of treading water. There's an awful lot of great authors with big followings in that genre, and I couldn't really crack into the top of it. I was just, like I say, treading water, and I didn't know if I wanted to continue. I said, maybe writing's really not my gig. Maybe I should move on to something else. I was at a writer's conference, and during a break, I talked to one of the speakers, and I said, well, you probably won't be seeing me again at the conferences. And she said, why not? And I said, well, I'm thinking about making a move. I said, I'm not really going anywhere as a writer, so maybe I should look at something else. And we talked, and she said, with your background, she said, you ought to be doing nonfiction police procedurals. And she said she had been a former civilian employee of the Indiana State Police, and she mentioned that she had written the history of the Indiana State Police. And she said, you're in Vegas. She said, why don't you write the history of the Las Vegas Police Department? And it kind of appealed to me. And she says, after the conference, I'll email you, what I did and how I did it, and you can see what you can do. So she did. She followed up, and I ended up getting an appointment with the Las Vegas Metro Police Department. And I talked with the undersheriff. I told him I would like to write the history of Las Vegas Metro, but I would need them on board with me. I would need their assistance and their backing to do the job. And by the time I got home from the meeting, the undersheriff had called and told him I left a message with my wife. Tell Dennis we're on. I just talked to the sheriff and we're a go. So that was the start of it. And I ended up doing a book called Policing Las Vegas. And it was the history from 1905 through, at that point, 2005, of the Las Vegas Metro Police Department. And in that book, I knew that, a Sin City book, you got to have something about the mob. So I didn't know what to write about. And I asked one of the detectives I was working with, and he said, write about Tony Spilatro. And I kind of went blank. I said, who's Tony Spilatro? And he said, did you ever see the movie Casino? I said, yes. He said, well, Joe Pesci's character is based on the real life Tony Spilatro. And I said, oh, I didn't know that. And he said, yeah. He said, that movie's probably 95% accurate. So that's what I did. I wrote a section about Tony Spilatro, and I became intrigued with him in that whole era. And that opened the door for me for several other books and a whole bunch of contacts.
Oh, yeah. I mean, some of the books that you've done, I mean, we could be here for hours and hours just with the fascinating stories that are inside these books that you've documented and put your time into as well. One day I'd love to come down to Florida and potentially interview you in person on some of these books in depth, because with these interviews that we do right now, you can only go into so much detail. Do you know what I mean? And we're also here as well to talk about your latest book, which is The Rise and the Fall of a Casino Mobster, which we're just getting into. So yeah, I mean, most people when they watch the Casino movie, I mean, I always remember Casino, right? Who doesn't? That's watched it, and it's actually based on a lot of fact. That's incredible. And also, when you had the access to the police in Vegas to initially, draft the first kind of book that you did with them, that must have opened up a lot of trust with them. But even with you being a former investigator, was there was still that sort of standoffish, wasn't there, in a sense?
Yes, it took quite a while. Now, I had to, primarily with the police history book, it was dealing with the cops, both retirees and on-duty cops. But as I got into the offshoot of the police history, when I got started writing about the Spilatro era in those books, I had to develop a confidence and a trust with the law enforcement and former law enforcement people, as well as the mobsters. And that, you got to walk kind of a tight line there, because you've got to have both sides trust you. And that takes a little bit of time to develop the confidence and the trust. But I did find that when I started contacting former law enforcement, FBI and police, that they had seen the Casino movie, and because some of them felt that the Casino movie was all from the mob perspective. It was written from the mobster standpoint, and that they had done an awful lot of great work during that era to bring these guys down, bring them to justice. And the Casino movie didn't properly reflect that. So once I established a rapport and the trust, most of the former law enforcement people were more than happy to tell their side of the story and what had actually happened from their perspective.
Yeah, I mean, and I suppose having that access initially with the material that you were writing gave you access to some of the investigators that wouldn't have been so easy to find had you not had been working with the department prior to moving in that new direction as well.
That's very accurate. Yeah, it opened the door to me to a whole bunch of people, and then some of the former mobsters as well. So it was a nice balance I had, between the both sides of the equation.
Yeah, because I guess a lot of these retired investigators, some of them don't want to talk, do they? Or they don't want to talk to the wrong people, or they just want their story represented correctly. Or actually, they've got, there's other connections with these people that are still serving time, and they just do not want their name out there, do they?
That's correct. Some people, some of the people I contacted didn't want to talk at all. They just didn't want to get involved. Others, a couple of them wanted money for their story, and when you start paying for information and stuff, it's always calls into doubt the credibility. If somebody's getting paid for this, are they doctoring their story to to earn a buck? And some were concerned about safety issues. They had several reasons. and others were, like I say, more than happy to participate. So it was a mixture.
So just going back to Tony, and I hope I don't get the name wrong. I think it's Tony Spilatro. So please correct me if I'm wrong. What's the connection between Frank Cullotta and Tony Spilatro?
Yeah, I understand. No, you're doing fine. Frank Cullotta and Tony grew up together in Chicago. They were the same age, and they got involved in a lot of criminal activity together as kids, as juveniles, and then stayed together and did a lot of things as adults. And Tony's goal was always to become a so-called made man in the Chicago outfit, which was Chicago's organized crime family. Frank never wanted to go that route. He preferred to be independent. But anyway, he and Tony had a great relationship. And when Tony moved to Las Vegas in '71 to become the boss, if you will, of to represent the Chicago outfit's Vegas interests, Frank was in prison at the time. But when Frank got out, Tony needed more help. He was expanding his horizons in Las Vegas, and he invited Frank to come out and be what they call a street lieutenant. So Frank joined him in Vegas and worked for him there.
Frank obviously was arrested along with a number of others in the end. He actually got caught drilling a hole in the wall, didn't he? I mean, that's what they were known for, weren't they? Drilling holes and, well, many other things as well. But
yeah, Tony wanted Frank to form a crew that would carry out various missions, if you will. They watch Tony's back, provide protection for him as necessary, and also do his bidding as far as robberies go, and arsons, and in some cases murders. So Frank got this crew together. Some of them were strictly thieves. They were all thieves. Some limited their activities to thievery and a little rough stuff, a little muscle, and others were hardcore killers. One of them had killed several people, and they assembled, and if Tony said, "Dave, I want you to knock off a particular jewelry store, for example, or a particular business. I have information that there's a big score to be had." Frank would send his crew out, and at that time, now you're going back in the '70s and early '80s. The alarm systems weren't what they are today, and a lot of them were just doors and windows that would be alarmed. So if you cut through the wall, you could bypass the alarm system and get in by going into that direction. So the media eventually dubbed them the Hole in the Wall Gang because of their penchant for going into gaining access through holes in the walls.
yeah, and when Tony was put through the system, did he not admit to? Oh God, how many murders did he admit to? I mean, it was over 300 crimes he admitted to, but it was a number of murders as well.
He had a bunch, and he was suspect in a lot more. I think I saw one time like 25 or 30 murders. He was suspected in, but were never proved.
Okay, and then he did some time in federal prison he went to?
Frank ended up in prison. Tony never got convicted. Tony never got convicted, and he died before the doors were closed. The walls were closing in on him, and he died before he had to go to trial. So he got, for all the stuff he did or was suspected of doing, his jail time was very limited. He served, he was held here and there, but as far as for the major crimes and major jail time, no, he didn't serve. Frank did.
So if we just go back to Frank's boss, Tony. So Tony was murdered, correct?
Correct.
And when was Tony murdered?
1986.
So when we watch Casino the movie, and if we go to that end scene where Joe Pesci and his brother are baseball batted to death, that didn't actually happen in a cornfield as portrayed in the movie. That actually took place in a basement of a house in Chicago, and there was two of them that was murdered as portrayed in the movie. So the bodies, I believe, were taken to a cornfield and buried, and they were eventually discovered. Now, is that correct?
Yes, they were discovered a few days later. The farmer that owned that property was on a farm, He noticed there was when he was out doing other chores there on his tractor that there was looked to be fresh movement about the dirt, and he got suspicious, and he ended up checking into it and called the police when he realized something was amiss, and they excavated there and found the two bodies, the Spilatro brothers.
God, okay, all right. So there is a lot of truth in the movie Casino. So, and I'm guessing that Frank had nothing to do with that hit.
No, Frank had nothing to do with it. Frank was in witness protection at the time. He had become a government witness, and he was being moved about the country under a new identity.
Okay. So, how long did Frank sort of spend in prison? And was it federal prison, or was it just normal prison, or?
He did both. He did both state time in Illinois and federal time. He served most of his federal time in the federal facility in Terre Haute, Indiana. He did his federal time there. So he did both state and federal. Yeah, I think he had a total of about 9 years.
And right, and he entered into the witness protection program when his boss was still alive, when Tony was still alive, because wasn't it? I think that the system played back a recorded some sort of wide recording of Tony talking about cleaning his dirty laundry, and he actually was referring to Frank and others at the time.
That's correct. The FBI had come up with the information that Tony had asked permission to have Frank killed. And with the FBI, Frank was in jail at the time. He'd just been convicted of a charge of possession of stolen property. And he was in jail, and the FBI requested a meeting with him, and they informed him that he was on the hit list.
Wow. Okay, so all right then. Well, lead us into the point then of getting to connect with Frank and how that happened and what happened on that journey as well.
Well, I was saying that I had originally cultivated several law enforcement sources or former law enforcement sources. One of them happened to be the FBI agent who worked with Frank and debriefed Frank after Frank became a witness, a government witness. And I was frustrated because I was having a great deal of success with the lawmen. I was having trouble with the mobsters. They were either dead or in prison or vanished. And I was telling the FBI agent, the former FBI agent one day, I said, I really wish I could get a hold of one of these guys. And he said, how'd you like to talk to Frank Cullotta? I said, God, I'd love it. So he said, I'll arrange a phone call. So he did. He set up a phone call. I went to the FBI agent's office, and Frank called in by phone, and we had maybe 5-minute conversation, nothing major. And I asked him a couple of questions about my book called The Battle for Las Vegas, The Law versus the Mob, was at the publishers, and I wanted to add a couple of comments from him. And he gave me answered a couple of questions for me, and I was able to get them added to the manuscript before it was printed. So that's how Frank and I first met. And a while after that, I was thinking about Frank, and I told the former FBI agent, I said, next time we talk to Frank, I said, ask him if he's ever thought about writing his story. I said, if he were candid, he's got a lot to tell. So eventually, Frank contacted me or reached out to me through the FBI guy, and he said he would like to meet with me in person and discuss the possibility of writing a book. So that's how that came out. We ended up meeting and made a deal to co-author his biography titled Cullotta. And from there, we did 3 more books together. And the last one was the rise and fall of a casino mobster.
Yes, and now we were just, I think we just mentioned at the beginning of this interview that Frank has also passed away last year in August. Now that was it COVID complications and other things that were going on? Well,
he had COPD, very severe COPD. And he was in the hospital on and off, and his condition was deteriorating. It was obvious, and there was no cure. It was a downhill run. And the last time he went in the hospital, then COVID became an issue after he was in the hospital. So he didn't go into the hospital because of COVID, but became an issue. And when he passed with COVID. I don't know that COVID was the primary cause of death, but he did have COVID at the time.
Yeah, it was yeah. Any underlying issues like you described in there would have been difficult. Yeah, absolutely. And did you get to see him before he passed?
I did not, and I talked to a mutual friend who was in Vegas. I was gone. I was out of Vegas, and he told me he was allowed in the hospital, but not in the room. He could stand outside the room and look through the window, and they could communicate by hand signals or expressions or what have you, but he could not enter the room itself. So he was with Frank or in the area at the time Frank passed.
Did he pass with any sort of family, or was it just by himself, or
Himself and this mutual friend. And again, the friend was not physically in the room, but he was outside in the hallway.
Obviously, you couldn't just go and communicate with Frank, but being under the witness protection program, I'm guessing that it was only done through a third party that you could ever communicate.
Originally, I could not know Frank's new identity. I could not know what he was doing or his activities. I had no contact information. And it made writing the manuscript, when Frank and I agreed to do his biography, it made it very difficult, very cumbersome, because every time I needed to ask him a question, I'd have to call the former FBI guy, who would have to reach out to Frank and set up a time for a call. And eventually I told Frank, I said, I hate to tell you this. I said, but this just isn't working. I said, this book's never going to get done. And he said, what's the trouble? And I said, well, I just need access to you. We have to be able to talk, not wait 2 or 3 weeks between conversations. I said, we're not going to finish. And he said, I see your point. He says he was living in Southern California at the time. I was in Vegas. And he said, what if I come to Vegas and we'll meet and we'll get some ground rules set up and we'll try to streamline this. And I said, okay, it's a great idea. And he said, where do you want to meet? And I said, well, how about my place? I said, because we don't want to be in a restaurant where we have ears, around us. So he said, okay. So I hung up the phone and I told my wife, I said, guess who's coming to dinner? She said, who? And I said, Frank Cullotta. She said, not in my house, he's not. I said, oh. I said, well, I can't call him back and tell him he's not welcome. So when the day Frank showed up, he came in one door and her and the dog went out the other because she refused to be in the house with him. But that eventually changed over a period of time. They got to be great friends. And boy, when he passed, she was really devastated.
How did you take those? What were those conversations like when you're talking about, the murders that he had done, and how what was his take on reflecting upon, the lives that he had taken and the families that would have affected as well, and friends? What was his attitude on that?
Well, it was, first of all, tough because Frank was very monotone. This part of the Godfather movie where they said there's nothing personal, strictly business. Well, Frank kind of reflected that. We'd be driving around town. I'd ask him, I'd say, take me places where things happened and explain to me what went down here and there. So we'd be cruising around town. I'd be driving, and all of a sudden he'd say, I had to break a guy's legs here one night. And because there was no emotion in his voice, I'd miss it to begin with. And I'd get a half a block down the road and it would dawn on me what he had just said, that he said a crime had taken place there. And I'd say, wait a minute, Frank. I said, what happened? So we'd go back to the scene and he'd tell me what had gone down and why. And so you had to listen very closely because of that lack of emotion in the voice. And Frank told me, as we became closer friends, while we were business associates to begin with doing the book, then we became personal friends. And as we got closer, he would, I asked him one day, I said, Frank, I said, do you ever think about the people that you killed or hurt? And and the families, and so on. And he said, yeah, he said, I have. And he told me something that made me very happy. He said, but I'm at peace with that. He said, I found God. He says, and I'm at peace with what I've done. I've made a deal. So he did think about it, and he realized he had been wrong. He realized what he'd done was not right. And it affected not only him, but other, the people that he hurt or killed. And he had made peace with it. So I was glad for him.
Why do you think, up until his death, he was in the witness protection program, when a lot of the people that he was, rubbing shoulders with back in the day would have either, been too old to do anything or were not here anymore?
Yeah, Frank told me about that. Again, this was a subject we discussed on occasion. And he said that you are quite correct, that at that point, most everybody he had rubbed shoulders with, worked with, and associated with was dead or in prison or no longer a threat. He was concerned that somebody, though, do you ever watch the Western movies where the up and coming gunslinger wants to get a notch on his gun, so he knocks off the old veteran shooting artist? Well, to make a name for himself. So Frank was more concerned that an up and comer may want that notoriety of saying, "Hey, I'm the one that got Frank Cullotta." So that he wasn't so concerned about people who he knew, but people who just wanted to build a reputation. That was his. He felt that was the primary threat at that point.
Right, right. Well, he actually, we talked about the movie Casino. He was actually a big part of that in some sense of, when I say big part, I mean, he was, well, he was giving input, was he not, to either, direction of, would this be a realistic recreation of a scene with his type of character involved?
Yeah, Frank was a technical consultant to the film. He had a director's chair, right next to the director, Marty Scorsese, and they sat exactly next to each other as each scene was shot. Marty would turn to Frank, say, "What do you think of this? Is this the way it would have come down? Is the actor doing a good job?" That type of thing. And then when they were doing some of the killing scenes, Frank would say, "That's not the way it would have been done. Your guy's all wrong." Or the guy who has the killer, if he had any kind of speaking role, would say, "He's talking like a New York mobster and not a Chicago mobster. There's a difference." So Marty says, "Well, can you do better?" And Frank said, "Yeah, I know how to do it." So Scorsese ended up putting Frank in as the hitman in several of the scenes. One of them was a murder based on a murder that Frank had actually committed. And Nick Pileggi, who had written the screenplay, he said it was the first time he's ever had somebody actually recreate a murder they had really committed in real life. So it was quite a unique situation.
Do you think that with Frank, that there were other crimes that he committed that he never actually admitted to, he never discussed with no one?
I think that's a possibility. However, one of the things about being in the witness or being admitted to the witness protection program, accepted into it, they are vetted very carefully because the information they provide is probably going to be used in indictments and in trials against other people. So the FBI really goes through them with a fine tooth comb, and they have to verify every piece of information they give. If they're caught in a lie, they don't get in the program, and they face criminal prosecution for all their crimes. So any deal they may have made for a no time or a lighter sentence or anything goes out the window. So Frank, through his being admitted or accepted into the witness protection program, had been thoroughly vetted. And anything he withheld, if there was anything, was something that at the time would have been a more minor thing or not affected any of the people that were under investigation by law enforcement.
Yeah, I mean, you just can't imagine what Vegas was like back in the day, can you? When it was, hearing some of the stories that you've just told here. But where is that sort of mob boss mentality nowadays? Are they sort of, are they still there in the background somewhere, but just something more kind of hidden under something more legit? Would you say?
There's been a big change since the old days, and I'm going back even to the days, of Al Capone and so forth, and Lucky Luciano, and the omerta thing, that you never talk, and you take it to your grave with you, any information. And that has all changed now. And I think a big turning point was RICO, when they got the RICO statutes where these guys could be prosecuted, for running a corrupt enterprise. Um, that changed a lot of things. And then, people started flipping. People started going over to the other side, making deals. And so there's nowhere near today this oath of loyalty and sticking to it that there was years ago. And I think that's obviously a great benefit for law enforcement and for the innocent citizens who may have been hurt by criminal activity, by mob organized crime activity.
Do you think a lot of these mobs, bosses or mob family members that were left over entered into sort of other businesses? Like, I always heard that, that the back in the day, the porn industry was sort of, heavily influenced by, not influenced, but run by mob bosses.
That's correct. A lot of them, when the ownership of the Vegas casinos came into question, during that Spilatro era, and they had to get into the corporations. Then they moved the mob out of the hidden ownership and control. A lot of the mobsters then went into the adult entertainment world, and in fact, I did another book about that called Wrong Numbers, and the New York mob had a heavy hand in the industry there, and that's where a lot of them went after the casinos bounced them out.
Yeah. Do you think that there is any sort of influence out there now from the sort of mobs as any sort of power in the sense? I mean, obviously, but I think of Chicago as well, not just Vegas. But I mean, does that even exist? Do you think even now?
Well, here's my belief that anytime you have a lot of money involved, now Vegas, of course, now the pandemic thing, slowed that down to a great deal, but when you got the kind of cash that is in Vegas, and I think we'll be back at some point or in some version after the COVID thing, or any place we get that kind of money, any industry, you're going to have. It's going to be attractive to the criminal element, to the organized crime element. So yes, I don't think it's as pervasive as it once was, but I think it'll always be there whenever there's money to be made.
Now, Frank was just one of many people in the mobs that you brush shoulders with from the research that I've done. But you also met Henry Hill as well. So for those who may not know, who was Henry Hill? And just give us a bit of background on, just your time with him as well.
I did, yes. Yes. I met Henry, and all I can say is was a unique individual. And love him or hate him, Henry could draw a crowd. When we used to do events, all you had to do was put Henry Hill on the billing, and it was going to be standing room only. And we did several back a few years ago. That the Las Vegas Clark County Library every January was Mob Month. And for every Tuesday during the month, they would have some kind of a mob-related presentation. And I was frequently would set up one or two of those, and I'd be the moderator for panel discussion. And I invited Henry, and I knew when he was there, the theater we had held, I think it was 350 people. They had an overflow room that they could hook up with a closed circuit TV arrangement, that held another 100. And when Henry was going to be one of the panelists, there was not a seat in the place. The overflow room was filled, the theater was filled, and they were, they liked the overall show, but Henry was the big draw.
Yeah, I can imagine he was. Yeah, and there were some funny times in there. Well, not funny, but it must have been weird that you've got all those ex-investigators that would have done anything to have caught these people back in the day, and they're rubbing shoulders together, and that's all okay. But I mean, was it? I mean, it's a funny thing, isn't it, for them all to get together in one room sometimes.
The first time I was doing a local TV show in Vegas back in the day, and I wanted to. Frank Cullotta happened to be in town in Vegas on some business, and I got two of the FBI agents, former FBI agents, the commander of Las Vegas Metro Intelligence, who had led the charge against Frank, and Frank. I invited them all to be in the studio with me, and they all agreed. And I got thinking, I said, boy, oh boy, I hope there's no fists flying here when these guys get together, because they had some very tense moments back during the Spilatro times. And it was just amazing to me. Of course, they got to the studio a little before the show started, and my fears were put right aside, laughing and joking. And do you remember when I did this? And do you remember, oh yeah, we followed you that night. Well, I saw you. I had you in my rear view mirror. You guys couldn't outsmart me. And then they'd jab each other back, all good natured. And it was really kind of an amazing thing for me to watch, because I expected something different, but it wasn't. They were all very cordial.
That's incredible. Yeah, that's amazing. And I mean, obviously, you detail a lot more in the book, The Rise and Fall of a Casino Mobster. How would you sum up that book? I mean, is it your story and Frank's story in there as well?
Yeah, I guess you could say it's the Spilatro story from Frank's perspective. As an insider. And it goes into all the detail and what eventually brought Tony down. One of the reasons that led to his being whacked by the Chicago outfit. So it was a very, comprehensive account of what it was like during, back for these guys in the day. They had celebrity status. In most of the casinos, they had free reign. Fans following them around, and it was almost like a movie star or something. They were that kind of an elite, and then how it all came crashing down and why it did.
Yeah, and I guess that you're really proud of that. You got to do these type of books as well, because I mean they're going to live on for a long time.
Yes, it's now Frank's. My first, after the police book, my book, The Battle for Las Vegas, The Law versus the Mob, came out in 2005. That book today is still selling well. Now, when you have a shelf life for 16 years for a book where it's still, selling, that's kind of amazing. Frank's biography, Cullotta, came out in 2006. That's still selling. So that's kind of amazing for a book to be still doing something after that many years.
Yes, and what are you working on right now as well, Dennis?
Well, I've gotten into something a little different. I'm doing a lot of cold case investigations, cold homicide and suspicious death cases. And I'm doing a lot about that and about the botched investigations where the investigations may not have been handled properly by the police. So I'm into all that stuff now, and I've started a group called the Transparency Project about getting the information on these cases made public and available to the public, to the families and to the public.
That's incredible. Is there a website for that, or?
Yes, it's called The Transparency Projects, and that's plural, PROJECTS.com. TheTransparencyProjects.com. That's the website. And I also have a Facebook group by the same name, the Transparency Project, singular. So we've got both of them, and I've done an anthology called Survivors, which goes into the stories of some of these cases. And I'm writing now. In fact, I have a book at the publishers now, which is about one of those cases that I personally investigated. So
Interesting.
I'm into all that stuff now.
Yeah, yeah. And do any of these cases involve people that are still locked up?
No, in most of them, the cases were never solved. So no one was ever charged. No one was ever arrested.
Completely unsolved. And, yeah. Okay. That's
they're all open.
Yeah, that's incredible. Okay. Wow. Okay. As I say, you're doing some fascinating stuff, and one day, God, I'd love to have a proper interview where we're not over Skype and there's not so many. I find doing in-person interviews so much easier than this video connection type of interview. But that's all we've got. With all we've got right now, so we've got to make the best of it. So, yeah. So, well, listen. What's an important message do you think from the Casino Mobster books that you've done?
Probably that in the life, when I say the life, the mob life, there are almost never any happy endings. You ride high for a while, you're on top of the world for a while. You got money, you got cars, you got women, you got whatever. But that if you're in it long enough, eventually you're going to take a tumble, and you're not going to ride off into the sunset. Very rarely. There are a couple of cases where people have done that. But you're going to either end up in prison or end up in a cornfield or that type of situation.
Understood. Absolutely. Okay. Well, your website, Dennis, is?
Okay. I'm at DennisNGriffin.biz. DennisNGriffin.biz is my website. And then, of course, there's the Transparency Project website, which I do a lot of stuff on.
Actually, let me just mention one more thing as well. There was a Frank Cullotto's greatest kitchen hits that you did with him as well, wasn't there? With the food, the kind of the food, the Italian foods that he was that was near and dear to his heart, I'm guessing.
Yes, Frank asked me to do that book with him, and I said, "Geez, Frank," I said, "I'm a consumer. I eat, I don't cook, So I said I'd be worthless to you as far as that goes. But he said, well, my wife, I said, has a lot of recipes and so on. And Frank had a lot of recipes and his family had provided. And Frank loved to cook himself. So he wanted to do the book. And my wife worked with him on it. And then when Frank's condition was going downhill, we thought he probably wouldn't finish the book. So we had a talk, and he said, I want you to promise me something. And I said, what's that? And he said, I want you to promise me you'll see to it that the cookbook gets out. I said, I will. So when he was nearing the end, he signed off on his as being the sole author and put me on so that I would have some rights and could make changes to the book and so on and edit and all that kind of thing. And Wild Blue Press was very good about it. And I got the book finished, and Frank was not here, but I'm sure, if you believe in the afterlife, I'm sure he knows about it, and I'm sure he's happy.
Yeah, you talked about the cookbook there, and that Frank would have been happy with the cookbook. How do you know that? What are you? Have you been to any sort of psychics and?
Well, yes, as a matter of fact, I have, and that's why I guess I could say I know that Frank is happy about the cookbook, because after he passed, we did about an hour and a half reading with the a psychic for over 10 years and have the utmost confidence in her ability. And Frank told me through her that he was very pleased that I had followed through and that the cookbook was out. And that he knew what was happening. And he also said that he and others that he's with said it's a learning process, what he's going through. And he's learning an awful lot, and he's making changes and attitude adjustments. And he said he's coming a long way, and he's got a long way yet to go. So he's,
Yeah, because I always do think of that as well, Dennis. It's like, as much as it's interesting to tell the story of, what happened and, the sort of more, gruesome bits of all this, right? But, where is the learning in all this? Where is the, as you would say, the redemption, or where, how, I wonder, why these things happen like they do. And as you said there, even in that reading that you had, that on the other side there is a process that's going on, and these things had a bigger reason to sort of take place in the end, maybe.
Exactly, and I know after the reading, I recorded it, and I play it back every once in a while, and I pick up on things that I may have missed originally. And yes, Frank, is and he also told me who else is with him there and who he mingles with, and so it was a very, very, very interesting session, and I found it very rewarding for me personally.
Yeah, and I think a lot of detectives or investigators do work with good, psychic contacts that they build up throughout the years, and it's just something that's probably not talked about as much openly as it should be.
It isn't, because everybody has now. I'm not, don't think I'm a fool, and I know there's a lot of scam artists out there, and they get a bad name. It's like car salesmen. They tend to have a bad reputation, generally speaking, but there are some good car salesmen. So. This particular individual, the psychic, has proven herself to me over and over again, and I have the utmost confidence in her. And I work with her, don't hesitate to work with her, but I don't necessarily advertise it either. Because there are skeptics, there are people who might think I'm a little wacky, or might think it harms my credibility. So I'm very careful about who I discuss it with.
It's strange, isn't it, that the latter part of his life you two connected, and that you were able to, tell his story, and what do you think his story? I suppose you've already answered that. What his story teaches people, but I guess there's why do you think there's the fascination into the mobster kind of mentality? Is it because we could never experience that ourselves? Do you think?
Yeah, I think a lot of us, maybe one time or another, we watched The Godfather or one of the older mob movies and thought, man, just for a day, I'd like to be able to do what these guys did, or get revenge on the guy that wronged me or something. I would never do it actually, but just kind of fantasize about it. So I think there's that allure, if you will, about how these guys live like an alternate universe, the stuff they did. And I got to tell you, with Henry Hill, getting back to him for a minute, I asked him one time, Henry was telling me that they did a lot of truck hijackings, his crew. And he said after that, to launder the money, they would frequently go to Las Vegas, because that way they could claim winnings if they came back with something. And he was telling me how they had a big score one time, and they went to Vegas. He said, we started out pretty good. He said, the first couple of days we were kicking butt there. He said, making, doubling our money. He says, then everything went belly up. He said, and we ended up going home broke. And I said, well, how much did you lose? He said, a couple $100,000. And as he was telling me that, I'm thinking, if that happened to me, I'd be a candidate to be up on the roof of that casino diving off. And so I asked him, I said, well, didn't that bother you? I said, when that happened? you got to understand something. He says in those days, money was like monopoly money. It wasn't real. It was so easy to come by it. You didn't even think about it. You knew you had to have it. And he said, all we do, he said, we went back and we hijacked another truck. So that was the feel for that day, and the power and the money thing. It wasn't real. It was tough for me, and I'm sure a lot of average normal people to relate to.
Absolutely, it is. Yeah. Well, look, Dennis, just thank you for sharing, parts of your work here as well. And I know there's a lot more that you've done and you're doing. So I appreciate everything that you're doing right now as well. And I just want to say, until next time, it's been a pleasure to have you on.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin, and hopefully we can get together in person someday.